testimony to Mashiach. If we look at the Shema, we would see that in Shema we have, it's kind of exaggerated, but the ayin in the Hebrew text is going to be enlarged, and that in Echad, the Dalet's going to be enlarged. When we put those two together, it spells a word, ad, which means witness. We're a witness of what? That Elohim prevails. We are a witness in the mode that we pay attention to Elohim. We discern what the Word says. We apply that to our lives because we understand what's being said. And we're content in our relationship with our Elohim. So, we are to perceive, declare, and make known the ladder to Sinai, which is also known as Torah. We carry forth the Shema too, as we'll read in a few verses down the road when we get there, we carry it to Enosh. Seth begot Enosh. Enosh is a word that means frail, weak, mortal. So we take this Shema, we take this idea, we take the Torah, because we are to be a light to the nations. We take it forth to a frail, weak, and mortal humanity in desperate need of restoration and compensation that comes from the Word and the anointing of Yahuwah Elohim, our Elohim. So what happened? What happened? We have this idea. It was given to Adam, who was created in the likeness and the image of Elohim. Adam passed it on to Seth in the image and likeness of Adam, who was in the image and likeness of Elohim. But something happened that kind of sent it all south. So last week, we discussed the sons of Elohim as being the progeny of Seth, who were enticed by the daughters of men and fell away from their intimacy with Yahuwah Elohim as a result. So we ask, has humankind fallen away from the Shema in order to pursue a deceptive spiritual path? We say the sons of Elohim. Sons, when we think of a son, we think of a masculine idea. When we say daughter, we think of a feminine idea. So we bring into mind the ideas of Ish and Isha. We bring into mind that Ish represents for us our physical forms of worship, prayer, study, praise, and that Isha represents, it comes from, he says, she shall be called Isha because she was taken from Ish, that Isha represents the spiritual manifestation that comes out of that worship. What if that worship becomes flawed? Then what happens to the spiritual aspect? It's also flawed. What if the spiritual aspect interferes with the physical aspect to cause the physical aspect of worship to become flawed? Then we start to get discrepancies. And then it is no longer in the image and likeness of Elohim. It becomes more and more in the image and likeness of something else. Let's consider some things that went wrong. We have the Torah that's given, okay? The Torah is given to Moses, teaches it to the people. Well, actually, let's back up a little bit. The Torah is spoken by Elohim to the people. He gives them the first 10 commandments. And instead of accepting it, they reject it. They reject it out of fear. They reject it because they're distracted. They want something else, so they make a golden calf. The golden calf gets destroyed. The first set of tablets gets destroyed. A second set of tablets is created, this time with the Levitical law, because the first time they were supposed to be a nation of priests. Priest is a word that Cohen means teacher. They were supposed to be a nation of teachers. They were supposed to go to the world and teach them the undefiled word of Elohim. but they didn't pay any attention to it. They said to Moses, you listen for us. You tell us what it says. Then they went off and made the golden calf. The first set of tablets was broken. The second set of tablets containing the Levitical law, the law of sacrifices to atone for the sin of the golden calf, was brought forth. They lived under this Mosaic covenant. What happened? They were doing okay. They crossed over into the promised land. And instead of doing what Elohim says, kill everything, don't leave anything alive, kill all their cattle, cut down the trees that don't bear fruit. It's pretty specific. Don't allow anything that goes contrary to my word into your worship. So what did they do? They dilly-dallied, they made a covenant with this one, and they said these people are okay, we're not going to mess with this one. And before you know it, their men and their women are intermingling and intermarrying. And what do you have? Now you have idolatry. And we go into Judges and we understand the seriousness of it, that they would fall into a really bad state, the judge would come along, fix it all, and they would be okay for a little while, and they would fall again. Another judge had to rise up and fix it all. And it continued this way until they got a king. And the first king, it went okay until he got jealous, envious, angry, and in his vanity tried to kill the thing that had built up his kingdom. Didn't work out. David ends up as king. David is a king after the heart of Elohim. David does a good job. David falls. The whole Beersheba incident. But he maintains his integrity, but still things start to fall apart. Solomon starts off good. Praise, give me wisdom, give me the ability to take care of this people. Elohim makes him the wisest king of all time. He takes care of the kingdom, his entire reign. There's not a war that takes place, but in the process of it, he does what? He intermarries with everybody. Okay? And he brings all of this worship into something that was at one time pure is no longer pure, and now it's getting even more impure. That he even built idols for his wives and this and that. Then he writes the book of Ecclesiastes that says, I've done all this stuff. I'm sorry that I did all this stuff because I realized it was for nothing. So we move on and we go and we follow the children of Israel, that they have a good king, then they have a bad king, and a good king and a bad king. The kingdoms divide. Both kingdoms, good and bad, good and bad, good and bad. Until they're conquered. Well, the diaspora, they go off to other kings, and we read about Daniel, and we read about some of the other prophets that were in captivity and how they maintained strength and purity in the Torah, constantly saying that the people have fallen and transgressed. But now we have something that takes place in 332 BC, that a king Alexander conquers Palestine. And the Jews begin to flourish because he is tolerant of their religion. So they're flourishing. You know, they're studying Torah and everything. But time goes by and they decide they want to be more Greek. They want to take on the customs of the Greeks because it's modern. So the Torah is translated from Hebrew. We see the importance of it being in Hebrew into Greek for the sake of the Greeks. Say, men and children, the boys, reverse their circumcision so they can take place in the athletics. The circumcision pretty much slows down and stops. They're taking on the ways of the Greeks. Eventually it starts to turn on them where the Greeks start to not be so tolerant. And now it becomes illegal to keep the Torah in Hebrew. It becomes illegal to do circumcision. It becomes illegal to keep Shabbat. It's even illegal to teach Torah. We have dreidels for Hanukkah that taught the young children how to play or how to understand Hebrew. So what has happened? We say that the Maccabees came and ran out the Greeks. The reality of it was more of a civil war going on than it was anything else. The Greeks just happened to be there. But it was the Hellenized Jews that were going against the Orthodox, shall we say, Jews that didn't agree, and the Greeks backed the Hellenized Jews, and there was a big hubbub. And eventually the Maccabees won, and they put it back into perspective. They restored the temple and everything. But now we have a Torah in Greek, we have the Torah in Hebrew, but we haven't kept the Torah in Hebrew altogether because it's been illegal. So scribes start to rise up. These are called the Sofarim, that start to copy the Torah and get it back to where it should be in Hebrew. But from the Sofarim, something comes up, something arises out of that. And around 60 BC, a group called the Pharisees start to rise up. The Pharisees start to interpret the Torah. They start to say that it means this, it means that. And then they come up with an idea of the fact that they state that it's a fact that there were two Torahs given at Sinai. There was an oral Torah and there was a written Torah. The Pharisees go as far as to say that it was the oral Torah that was given first, before the written Torah. And the question on that is, how can you have an oral Torah that is commentaries on something that isn't written? So we have around 60 BC the birth of something called rabbinical Judaism. Okay? We have another group that doesn't agree with the Pharisees called the Sadducees. They say, if the Torah doesn't say it, then we don't agree with your interpretation in what is becoming the Talmud. The Talmud was written between 60 BC and 200 AD. So what's happening here? We have the Pharisees that are starting to interpret. They're starting to say, it doesn't matter what the Torah says. It doesn't matter that the Torah says very clearly, and Yehovah said. What we say, what the rabbis say, takes precedence over what Torah says. 200 AD, the Talmud is written down. And something that we call Judaism is established. It wasn't called Judaism up till this point. Okay? Now, we have something similar that takes place down the road. We have Yeshua comes, sets everything straight. He has a group of followers called the Netzarim, the branches that are fed by the tree, that are fed by the root. He teaches them very specifically, tells them this is the way it should be. And what happens? Yeshua dies, the apostles die, and people start to come up and say, no, this is what that means, and this is what this means, and they start to develop doctrines. In around 324, a man by the name of Constantine becomes king, or becomes emperor. He chooses Christianity because it is the weakest religion as his political front, so that he can push forward his agenda. 325, we have the Council of Nicaea, where a bunch of ideas are brought to the table. Amongst those are the Son of God, Christology, Passover is no longer to be celebrated, Easter is to be kept. We no longer do those things that the Jews do. A few years later, Judaism amongst Christians is banned. So what do we see is happening here? That what was given to Adam in the likeness and the image of Seh HaElohim, that Adam passed on in his image and likeness onto Seth, the Shema, that brings us restoration, that brings us deliverance, that was something that replaced our vanity, has been distorted. This is the same thing that happened at the time of the flood. That they became so distorted and so out of whack that something had to take place to bring it all back into perspective. So we ask, has humankind fallen away from the Shema in order to pursue a deceptive spiritual path? The word of Elohim says, it's a paraphrase, that the word to the reign of heaven is long and narrow, and few find it. So this leads us back to the ever-present question that Elohim asked Adam in the garden after he had transgressed. Where are you? What path are you on? Where is your belief system? We see that when we look at it from the Hebrew and we understand that things have been added to the word, things have been taken away from the word in the various languages that it's been translated into, that it throws confusion and it throws us off path. This is why you don't have it yet, you'll have it here in a few months. Devarim in the Torah, in the Hebrew Torah, Devarim, Deuteronomy 13:1. In King James and everybody else's, it's Deuteronomy 12:32. 12:32 doesn't exist in Torah. It's 13:1. What do we understand from 13:1? 13 is the numerical value of Echad, that he is one, that there is one word, and there is one anointing. So what does Devarim 13:1 tell us about one word and one anointing? He says, all this word which I command you, that you observe to do, you shall not add thereto or take away from it. If we're to keep the word in its pure form, then we have to take time to understand what it says. We have to take time to Shema. We have to take time to hear and listen to the anointing that speaks to us. We have to take time to read so that we can perceive, pay attention to, and discern the word in order that we can comply and apply the word to our lives. Like Yeshua said, the Father is seeking in spirit and in truth. This is why Paul tells Timothy, in Aramaic, it matches King James. He says, study to show yourself approved. A worker need not be ashamed, because he can rightly divide the word of truth. We're in the midst of compiling the Torah in Hebrew and English to help us to be able to do exactly this. But this is what the gist of this first part of the genealogy is telling us. And as we go down, we're going to understand that we got farther and farther away from this, that there was a need for the ark. The Hebrew word for ark is also the Hebrew word for word, and that 8 people had to get into the ark. 8, the het, that we have a choice to hide behind a wall of sin, or to yoke ourselves to the nourishment, the protection, and the rest of the word. by entering into it in order to be able to what? What did they do inside the ark? They took